I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May. And tonight, Francesca Tripodi tells us how we can use the tactics of the right to make sure the Democratic message doesn't get lost in the mix. We're Speaking starts now.
So one of the themes that we return to a lot at the Lincoln Project, and Maya, when you and I are talking to each other, is that one of the failings that we've had over the past few years around interpreting our politics and how we've ended up like on the knife's edge of losing our democracy is that we've had a real failure of imagination. We as Americans, we do think there's something special about being an American and that it just couldn't happen here, but it has again and again. We keep seeing things that we thought could not possibly happen here, and they just keep getting worse, and they could get so much worse. We're watching right now what it looks like when you're trying to get back rights after a totalitarian regime has taken hold and turned portions of the population to second-class citizens. What we're seeing in Iran, Iranian women and their allies are rising up in really large public protests. It's incredible to see, but they're having to fight back for their women's very basic primary rights that were taken away from them in the revolution in 78 and 79. Before that, and for most of the 20th century, Iran was an incredibly modern, cosmopolitan society and culture. And that went away in a revolution. Today's right in America, they want American women to live the way Iranian women do now. And, We're Speaking stands for civil rights for all people. And we stand not just for the rights of our fellow Americans, but we stand with the women of Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. This failure of imagination is something like we just constantly think it can't happen here, but it's already happening here. And in fact, it actually has happened here, as all marginalized communities know. And so this is something that's not new to us, but I think it's new to a lot of my sisters. And so it is really, really important. Like I was even talking to my daughter just before the show, and she asked me, she's like, "Are you paying attention to what's happening in Iran?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." And watch the show because we're actually going to be talking about it. At the end of the day, she said something that was so simple. She's like, this is really about choice. It's about whether someone wants to wear a hijab or not wear a hijab, or somebody wants to have an abortion or not wants to have an abortion. She's 14 and she gets it. What I would like for us to get is the understanding that elections are about choice. Right? We cannot give up this opportunity to choose who leads us, because if we give up this opportunity now by not voting, by not making sure our apolitical friends are voting, we may lose the ability to choose for ourselves and future generations. And so this is ultimately in a situation where we are losing choice before we even know we are. And that is, what I'm talking about right now is information. The information that we get on the internet is often being controlled. And everything that's happening right now, it's a power grab from authoritarian leadership, and it's all connected to choice. And it's being manipulated, which is why I think it's so important that we are talking to tonight's guest, who has a full understanding of how they're manipulating technology to build a base that thinks they're getting the truth.
Yeah, she sure does. Francesca Tripodi is a sociologist and an information scholar at the School of Information and Library Science at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the author of The Propagandists Playbook: How Conservative Elites Manipulate Search and Threaten Democracy. Welcome, Francesca.
Thanks.
We're so glad you're here. Yeah. Your book is incredible.
Thank you.
It is like over and over again through the whole book. It's just these moments of, oh my God, oh, that's what's that, like all these light bulbs are going off, and you see this web being formed, like, God, this is, I get it better now. And Maya and I are immersed in this stuff a lot. So reading stuff and being like, whoa, I learned a tremendous amount. So everybody read her book is my
Yes.
point. It's really important.
Thank you so much. I tried to write an academic book that everybody wanted to read, that normal people could very easily read. So that makes me happy to hear that you are enjoying reading it.
Very much.
Absolutely. And SEO is something that those of us who are immersed in the internet world have a good understanding. Search engine optimization. You talk about it in your book. So before we get into the weeds with everything, can you give us the basics of SEO?
Absolutely. So SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it's something that everybody is doing. It's the way that algorithms, because they're not people, they need to read content on the internet. So when search algorithms are crawling the internet and tagging the internet, they're coding it with different kinds of words and phrases so that it can best match the kind of information that you're looking for. And so SEO is about effectively gaming that system, or making sure that the information that you have to provide is going to match the kinds of queries that someone's going to be searching for.
So for all of that to work as it was originally intended by the search developers, then the tagging motives all needed to be pure. They needed to be people tagging what the content actually was. Otherwise, the whole thing is doomed to fail. What impact on our society and culturally is SEO having now that those motives are not so pure in a lot of cases?
Sure. So I'm wary to think that any kind of motive is pure or intentional. As a sociologist, I think understanding power dynamics and thinking through those power dynamics are really important. But when it comes to things like the politics of search engines, these are things that researchers have been saying for quite some time, right? Which is that in an information environment that is contingent on certain words and phrases, it's going to be really easy for people to make sure that their content lands on top. And so some of that is paid for content. I mean, we see this obviously in advertising. Now, search engines label advertising, but that wasn't always the case either. So some of these tactics are very straightforward. You pay for advertising and then your content is the top returns. Some of it is a little bit more insidious in the terms of, there's been really great research that shows that these large companies that operate search engines sometimes have a vested interest in putting their other subsidiaries to the top of these terms, right? So we see this in ways that small businesses are not necessarily elevating to the top. But what I'm trying to look at it is in terms of political gain. So how do people trying to run for office utilize these same tactics that are often part of advertising techniques so that they can make sure that their messaging lands on top?
So can you clarify though, because when we think about SEO and tagging and using hashtags and keywords, exactly what is the right doing to attract the attention that they're getting?
Absolutely. In my book, I talk about this in a couple ways. First, I think about it as like completely apolitical, and I think that's important, right? So I really think it's important for us to understand the important role inputs play, those keywords play. And something I talk a lot about is just something as easy as the color of the sky. So when you say like the sky is blue, you're going to get information about a blue sky. But if you search the sky is green, you're going to get information about a green sky. And so understanding the human dynamic of search, I think, is really important. Now, how that's being manipulated is in a couple ways. One, it's creating new keywords and concepts that aren't part of the mainstream media. This was something that was happening during the first impeachment of President Trump. There was a lot of dialogue around a person named Nellie Orr. And so this keyword was very specific to right-wing information circles. And people were signaling this keyword on the Senate floor. This was happening in radio broadcasting. This was happening in digital first content. So they're creating new keywords, but also they're elevating the techniques of the internet. By this, I mean publishing lots of different stories around these keywords, all at the same time and hyperlinking that content to each other. And so these kinds of signals make search engines think that the content's really legitimate. And this helps influence those returns so that they're at the top of those returns.
So they're tricking the search engines and they're tricking us at the same time.
There's like a dual tricking, right? One, it's saying, well, don't really pay attention to this. What you should be paying attention to is X, Y, and Z. But then creating a lot of content around X, Y, and Z helps ensure that when people go out there and do their own research, that kind of content is going to be returned to them. I actually refer to this as the Ikea effect of disinformation in my book.
So this gets us right into talking about data voids too.
Right.
Which is another thing that conservatives, the far right, seem to have understood and taken advantage of long before folks on the left have. What are data voids and how are they exploiting those?
Absolutely. Data voids is a term that was created by researchers at Microsoft, and it's meant to think about when very little high quality content is attached to a search term. So sometimes there's just search terms that have very little information attached to them. And it's by taking advantage of those search terms that you can really ensure that your content's going to rise to the top. And this is a common strategy that we see with propagandists as well as with conspiracy theorists. If you're trying to game a system, you don't want to use a word that's already in circulation. And again, this ties back to things like business. If I'm trying to sell a competitor to Doritos, I'm not going to name my product Dorito. I'm going to name it something that doesn't exist yet, and then create a whole bunch of content about that so that when people search for things like, well, what is this new chip? They're going to get my product over something else.
It's so much better when it's Doritos.
I know. When it's Doritos, it's tasty. When it's democracy, it's scary.
Yeah. Sorry, Ma, I don't want to jump in on you.
Oh, no, go ahead, jump in.
We have to talk a little bit about Prager University, which, God, I hope, like anybody who goes there who's watching the show, set a timer and then get the hell out. It's not somewhere you want to spend a whole lot of time, but it's important we understand what they're doing. So they're a far-right conservative educational site that primarily targets Gen Z, and the videos are like 5 minutes each. They're quick. They have graphics and, but they're snazzy. They're snazzy.
That's what Gen Z calls them, right? They call them snazzy.
They're groovy, and they have titles like "Fossil Fuels: The Greenest Energy" and "Where Are the Moderate Muslims?" And some cultures, are some cultures better than others? So we have examples of a couple of them that we wanted to talk to you about. The first one is this one called Naya Needs Energy, about a Central African family and this little girl named Naya who does not have electricity, doesn't have energy where she lives. And I ended up here because I did a search about expanding sources of green or renewable energies and ended up at this, which is all about, if we can pop that up for a second again, underneath what it, we don't have it. Anyway, underneath the description is why it's important to maintain oil and coal and like other fossil fuels so that, little Naya can have energy in Central Africa.
And real quick, Lisa, Prager University is not a university, right?
No.
Nobody can get a degree.
Francesca, you can describe what it actually is.
Yeah. Sure. So Prager University is a nonprofit organization that was started by Dennis Prager, who is a highly influential conservative talk show host and has been for quite some time. He's written many books. He's had radio programming, very successful conservative personality. And he has created Prager University. And a few things I think are important about this organization. One is that it creates extremely compelling content that is very highly resourced and highly engaging. I had the opportunity to do a report with Define American on anti-immigration videos and their proliferation on YouTube, and using a software that was able to measure metrics, we found that some of the top engaging, so effectively the content with the most views, one of the top video producers of anti-immigration content is Prager University, and they're tagging their content with words and phrases that are both associated with anti-immigration sentiment as well as pro-immigration sentiment, because they are very, very good at understanding how search terms work and dominating returns not only in search engines, but also on YouTube. So YouTube also effectively uses search in order to find content. And I was able to partner with a data scientist who wrote a script that pulled the tags of the top progressive content creators on YouTube and the top conservative content creators on YouTube. And effectively, what we were able to do was analyze what are the words and phrases that these producers are using to tag their content. So this wasn't driven by an algorithm. This was driven by the creator. And what we found is that content creators on the right have a much more sophisticated understanding of how keywords work and why tags are important for exactly what you said, right? You're out there searching for renewable energy information. And by tagging their content with words like renewable energy, they're able to surface to the top of YouTube or the top of other search engines these videos that are effectively promoting non-renewable energy, because they understand that in order to reach a broader audience, they have to not only engage with people who agree with them and the kinds of words that people who agree with them use, they also have to utilize the language of those who might oppose what they're saying. And then they create these extremely well-curated videos that are able to reach those audiences. And as testing has shown, what Define American did, they also did testing on what they refer to as the movable middle. And they found that this format of very short, highly curated content with like one personality are extremely compelling and very good at moving the dial in one way or the other. What's also interesting about the video you shared with me is this is actually a new area of involvement called Prageru Kids. And this content was largely rolled out in response to COVID-19 when lots of schools were going remote. And so they were able to not only kind of capitalize on this understanding of keywords, but also just understanding the learning environment had shifted into this very online format. And so they created very quickly content, targeting children as well as like kind of college and upwards. And also in my research, I found that this content, everybody loves this content. I mean, I talked to people who were 18 and I talked to people who were 75, and everybody loves Prageru because it's quick, it's easy to understand, and the videos are, quite frankly, very, very well done. The other really, I think, important thing to understand, and I also had the opportunity to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee in 2019, and so did Dennis Prager. And in this Senate testimony, they and also Prager University has tried to sue YouTube for censorship, claiming that they demonetize or flag their content. But something that I demonstrate in my research is that, conservatism is not actually being silenced by big tech. If anything, based on the keywords that you search, you will likely get only conservative content. So rather than kind of repeating this narrative that it's silencing or censoring one perspective, what I like to try to demonstrate is that keywords and relevance have a much larger factor in determining the kind of information that you're going to find than most of us realize.
So it's insidious. It's not illegal. They're doing it incredibly well. And they're doing it because they're on a mission. We've already seen that what is calling itself the conservative right, which we now know is more radical and not necessarily even religious based. They're on a mission, but they believe something you call scriptural influence. What is that? How does it come into play?
Sure. So one of the big things that I talk about in my book is that media literacy is not something that is uniform. It's actually very dependent on one's cultural background. And scriptural inference is this way of reading and engaging with text-based content and elevating that as a sacred text and going back into this text in order to answer life's questions. And it's rooted in a very Protestant engagement with the Bible. So we see this a lot in conservative groups who are often elevating aspects of faith. You see this practice that was very much taught to people in a Protestant faith-based institution, where you go into a text and you spend hours, digging in and reading just a couple sentences of the Bible. And I was able to accompany a young woman to her Bible study. And on that day, we read the Bible, we were talking through these Bible texts, and then there was a pivot where the person leading the Bible study said, okay, now I want us to use this same practice and think about the new tax reform bill. And he got out a copy of this new tax reform bill and started reading a passage from this tax reform bill. And he encouraged everyone there to go and read it for themselves. And that really struck a light bulb for me, because I thought, this is the same sort of rhetoric we see with constitutional conservatism, this elevating of a text, really digging in. This is why many people who espouse conservative views or who support candidates like Trump have read, very legal doctrine, the legalese, if we want to call it that. And we also see this during the impeachment of Trump, when there was this call to read the memo, right? That redacted transcript that was released from the White House. And this elevation of documents and really digging into the text allows people to back what they believe in a way that's not just, they're being tricked by some, third-party propaganda. No, it is in fact a very engaged form of understanding and reading, and the network of media producers, whether that be on YouTube or on the television or on radio, they're also using these same techniques. And so when they do that, it legitimizes their arguments, right? It says like, hey, I read like you do. I understand how you understand things. I'm going to take this text. And you see this often, with Tucker Carlson. He'll take a quote and it'll be behind him and they outline it. This is a common strategy in Prager University videos as well. And so by elevating these same techniques and knowing what the kind of media literacy practices their audiences engage in, it allows to really legitimize these arguments in a way that's different than just telling people what to think.
Yeah, I found this sort of, I'll say, a revelation, since we're talking about scripture, when I was reading your book, that we have on the left a tendency to describe folks on the right as, we make fun of them doing their own research, and we think of them as woefully uninformed or ignorant even. And these people are actually spending a tremendous amount of time attempting to educate themselves. And largely this manipulation is coming in without them knowing it. So it seems like there needs to be a whole mind shift. And then does that lead to sort of a shift in the digital approach that campaigns and activists use? Because just assuming these people don't care, aren't reading, aren't doing research, it is counterproductive, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think it is a huge disservice to think that anybody is just ignorant because of their political beliefs, right? That was actually something that I was trying to better understand, was how did Trump voters come to find information that they trusted? I did not think that it was adequate to say like, people are just going to the polls in droves because they were somehow tricked. And what I found is that there is a high level of political engagement amongst those who voted for Trump in 2016 and again in 2020, and that there was actually an increased number of voters in 2020, right, than those who voted in 2016. And so understanding the ways in which they engage with information, I think, is critical, especially because I think there was this emphasis on fake news and this idea that, oh, if they had better media literacy, that somehow things would change. And what I like to document in my book is that they have a very profound level of media literacy. They are critical of what they're reading and seeing, and they often go out there to find out information that they can trust. But because of the way the internet works, because most people don't know how the internet works, it's easy to fall in these misinformation traps without even realizing. And what I refer to as when I talked about this IKEA effect of disinformation, often propagandists will encourage their audience to go out and do their own research. They'll say things like, well, don't trust me. Go out there and Google it for yourself. But if you go out with the few terms that you have available at your disposal and you search for those terms, and only a handful of media producers are creating content around those terms, then that's the only information that you're going to get. And so, I call this the IKEA effect because business scholars find that when somebody puts together a low quality piece of furniture for themselves, they are more invested in it. They are like, yes, I made this myself, and now I value it more than if I had bought a similar piece of furniture just on my own. And it's this same practice that's being used by conspiracy theorists and propagandists. They're utilizing that tool. They're making it seem like it's the scavenger hunt, but they've drawn the maps, right? They've planted the treasures. And so when people go out there to find their information on themselves, it creates this set of faux autonomy where people then use that information and really ground themselves in those beliefs, thinking, well, how could I trick myself into believing these things when they've actually been, shown the path to query.
So the tough part about all of this is it seems like it's in many ways the fault of the left or progressives or center that we take for granted the kind of information that they're finding. And so now that, your book basically points out the fact that we need to be aware that they are informed. They're just informed with a different kind of information. And so right now, we're 34 days, I believe, from the midterms, which it's like, okay, now we all need a crash course in how we can best use these tactics. It sounds crazy to me in some ways. You're like, how do we use the tactics of the right for good? But how do we use the tactics of the right for good?
I mean, I think the biggest disparity, I would say, between content creators on the right and the left would just be understanding how information flows and tagging that content. So tags are so important. Not only do you want to tag your content with the information you're talking about, but you might also think, all right, well, what else might somebody else be talking about? And how does my message connect with those ideas, or how might my message resonate with those ideas in a meaningful way? I mean, for example, looking at the metadata from Prageru, they tag more of their content with feminism than they do with free speech. So, and clearly, I would say they are on a different perspective of feminism than many feminists. So they understand that some people are going to be like, well, what is this feminism thing? And when they search for it, they want to make sure that their content is also up there in those returns. So I think that the idea of tagging content is extremely important, not only with the information that you're conveying, but also understanding, well, what are the keywords and ideas that people who I might not necessarily agree with, or even in fact, who I'm in opposition to, what are they talking about, and how might I tag my content in similar ways? The other thing that I think is really important is listening to content creators that you might not necessarily agree with, not so that you can change your mind, but so that you can understand what are the core arguments that they are enabling, and how might my message speak to those, or how might I understand those messages. Those are my big thing. And then the other big thing I would say is really be mindful of your query to begin with. there is a lot of keywords and ideas that are only going to return low quality content. And so if you are seeing stuff on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Pinterest that you're like, that doesn't seem accurate, let me find out some more information on it. If you use the same words and phrases that you saw on social media and you put that into a search engine, the only thing you're going to get back is what you saw on that social media site. And that doesn't mean it's accurate. That just means it best matches what you're querying. So recognizing that those top returns are not necessarily always going to be the most accurate, especially if they exist in these data voids.
Yeah. Francesca, this is all we all have to become so much more literate, and reading your book and your articles. You've got a great article on hashtags and how people can be using those more effectively, because we basically screw that up the same way we screw up search tags. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Everybody, please do read Francesca's book. It is the Propagandists Playbook: How Conservative Elites Manipulate, Search, and Threaten Democracy. And it's all of our jobs to make sure that that threat is at least lessened. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really had fun.
Thanks, Francesca. I just need us to unprager you America over the next 34-ish days, desperately. I think it's scary to look at those videos. I really appreciate Francesca saying that we need to watch this content that's coming from the radical right. I think it's triggering for a lot of people for many reasons, partly because we're so siloed. We're not used to having to listen to these arguments. And so I think we have to change the way we consume media that is potentially offensive to our sense of being, and learn to watch it and listen to it for data, to understand how they're doing what they're doing and parsing it for the argument, so that we can then use those same tactics. Easier said than done.
Yeah. I mean,
so I'm like, here's a crash course.
There are lines that you have to draw in where you're trying to find empathy, but there are a lot of places that we should be trying to find more empathy and understand why it is that some people are reacting the way that they are, and why they are open to the information that they're coming across on the internet. That the right is doing an incredibly effective job of instilling fear in people. And we know fear is an incredible motivator, and they're going to keep ramping that up. That's why we're talking about, the southern border and all the scary immigrants coming in. And all of a sudden we're talking about crime waves again. And, they're going to try to terrify us all the way to November 8th. And understanding that and being able maybe to diffuse a little bit of that in the conversations you have with folks, you do that better if you understand what it is they're consuming.
Absolutely.
Small doses, though.
I know, tiny doses. Because when I watched the immigration video, y'all didn't get a chance to see it, but the one that came from Prageru, by the end of it, and it's only 5 minutes, you're like, well, these are some pretty interesting, these are good arguments. And so everything that Lisa
but they're not.
Said, but they're not good arguments.
They're effective.
Yes, they're effective arguments, but they're not good arguments. And I think it's really important, though, to understand when we're having the conversations with people who are influenced by these arguments, it's going to help with that empathy muscle. Because I know every time I have one of these conversations with somebody, I kind of want to lose my mind and may end up blocking friends because of it. So
it's hard. Yeah, because a lot of it really hurts.
It does.
Yeah, it's pretty personal when it is they're going after cultural issues, and cultural issues aren't just issues, they're human beings. And so a lot of them hit home in a very direct and painful way. So not always easy to hang on to that empathy.
A lot of meditation right now. Not going to have a panic attack between now and November 8th.
That's right.
Going to do the work, y'all. We're just going to do the work.
Yep. And all of you help us do it. You help us do it in so many different ways. But one of the ways that you can do it is by continuing to support the Lincoln Project. We don't take money from outside corporations. We are able to remain independent and talk about the things that need to be talked about with an honest voice that is our 100% bias in defense of democracy. And that's where we are, and you help us do the work with any donations that you're able to make. So we do appreciate your continued support and your continued activism.
Absolutely. And if you can't donate, you can also share the content and share it with some hashtags that will help reach those people who are perhaps on the fence about democracy. So make sure to do that. You can follow me at Maya on Stage, Lisa at LC Senecal, and check out the breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson returning tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. They will be joined by Scott Galloway. And before we go, here's a look at the last week in the Republican Party, and we will see you next week. Good night, y'all.
I wanted to apologize to humanity for voting for the Antichrist Obama.
The sovereign hand of God is upon Donald Trump.
I don't know much about crack, but it seems like a lot of crack.
Both President Trump and President Nixon were kicked out of office for doing exactly nothing wrong.
You don't have anything to apologize for. We all make mistakes in our life.
The word cult is a cop-out for people that are happy.
There is a group of world leaders who are a cult, and they're a satanic cult, and they're pedophiles, and they traffic children, they traffic people, they steal blood, they do sacrifices. That is not a conspiracy theory.
It seems like a real lot of crack, certainly for one or two people, but probably for a whole large group of people.
I would like to thank a great woman named Ginny Thomas.
The Biden administration is responsible, either directly or through proxies, for the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines.
We are going to push the broken windows policing that Rudy Giuliani pushed in the early 90s that turned New York City around.
Democrats want Republicans dead, and they've already started the killings.
Women are dumber than men. Women should be subservient to men. Women have no place in male activities.
The deep state, they have weather manipulation technology. They have DARPA. They know how to manipulate and create big storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, and these huge hurricanes always seem to target red states.
The FBI works with the Democrat Party to carry out mass shooting, false flags, so that they can actually push for gun control.
Why not abolish the VA?
The real person that must be held accountable for January 6th is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Merrick Garland has done more damage to the credibility of the Justice Department and the FBI than any attorney general in history. You know, I've got a new book that's coming out in 2 weeks.